Well, it's the beginning of August here, second day of August in fact, and it has been hot. I came out to do some climbing, and in the temperature as it is, even though I've got a lot of hydration, I had the thought, what am I going to do if I get up there and have an emergency? Can somebody get me down? Well, the way I normally anchor things, the answer is no. The second part of that, I guess, would be, do you really want to wait on a rescue truck to get here and then try to find out what the problem is and how to get you down? And the answer to that is no, I don't. So I've set up something here that anybody can work. And the idea is, in this case, I'm going to do some up and down climbs to about 50 feet. So what I want to have available is, if something happens to me up there and I have to summon help with a walkie-talkie that I'll have on, I want almost anybody to be able to work this thing to lower me to the ground. Now, I want to go over the concepts of this first. What I have is a ground anchor, and I'll get into all the details about this in just a minute. I've got my gear bag hung over here just to give me some counterbalance. But when I'm climbing, I'd be all the way up to the top of the tree. The rope, of course, comes over and down and anchors here, so I'm climbing up the other side. So if I've got 50 feet from the ground to the tie-in point and another 50 feet down to the ground, I've used 100 feet of rope. Now, if I'm up at the tie-in point, I'm 50 feet off the ground. So I've already used 100 feet of rope just to get from the ground back down to the ground level. So if I'm going to let somebody lower me, I'm going to have to be able to supply yet another 150 feet of rope. Because I've already used 100 to just get from the ground back down to the ground. So to let 50 go through here, which would lower me to the ground, it takes 3 times as much rope as the height you're climbing to set this up. And here's a very interesting point of order here. If you're lowering somebody down to the ground in a case like this, you don't want to run out of rope. If you run out of rope, even though they wouldn't be maybe too far off the ground, if the rope feeds through this thing and fails and they fall to the ground, unconscious to start with perhaps, there may be just complications on top of complications. So we don't want to run out of rope. So anytime you figure a ground rescue like this, 3 times as much rope as the height you'll be climbing to or expect to be rescued from. In fact, over 3 times, because you got to have a little bit to hold on to. The number of ways to do this are probably almost countless. This is what I came up with. It's what I like. It hadn't been in widespread use, so it's essentially untested except by me, and it works great for me. So let's go through what we've got here. If you look at the ground tie first, this is basically a cow's hitch. Where I deviate from the cow's hitch is I don't go polyester on polyester. You'll see the loop is joined by a delta, and the other ends are looped through that delta and tied off, and I'll explain that in just a minute. Just a word of caution here though, do not use a carabiner here. Use a ring. You can do this with a ring. Use a delta. Do not use a carabiner. Why? Because I'm pulling in that direction, I'm pulling in that direction, and I'm pulling in that direction. And carabiners are only intended to be pulled longitudinally, so that would violate that rule of safety. So don't use a carabiner here. Okay, the details about how I implement this. I double my rope. I wrap it around the tree and come out with 2 ends on this side. I've put my delta in the bight or the loop, and I've tied one end of the rope that came through to this delta. I'm using an anchor hitch here. I love anchor hitches. You can use whatever you prefer. I brought the other end of the rope through and up to a carabiner, and you can see the very similar characteristics of this and a cow's hitch. It is very cinching. It holds the tree. There are 2 strands of rope, so it doesn't focus as much pressure on the tree trunk, and I like that because I climb this tree a lot. Then, to connect the lowering device, which in this case is a Petzl ID, and I like that because it has a number of features. One, it locks off, so if I get slack in my rope, this thing's not going to let anything happen. Number 2, it's got, in this mode of lowering, it's got a panic mode. If I start coming down too fast, somebody panics and says, oh no, it'll just lock me off. So I like that too. I've connected all this up to the anchor with yet another anchor hitch. And I have very long tails here, so I'm not using the backup knot. And sometimes I wouldn't anyway. If I've got 8 or so inches of tail, I don't worry about it. One other thing I did do here is I tied a safety knot right here. And the safety knot is, if something should happen and this starts to slip and feed rope, when it hits this safety knot, it'll lock up with me again. Now, one of the things I do that I don't see many people do, that I like to do, you can see that it doesn't take a lot to feed that through. So if something pulled on this, or it got hung on a root or whatever, and this thing started feeding up, it's possible that it could clear itself. So when I tie a safety knot, and this is especially true if I'm tying a safety knot lower on my rope to rappel down to, just as a catch in case something happens to my descender, I put a half hitch right here. It's just an additional half hitch, and with that half hitch, you can't pull the knot out, but you can take it loose easily and pull the knot out. So it doesn't get in the way of anything, and it's just a little bit of a backup. Secures the loop in the safety knot in a very loose way. Now, in my case, I didn't have 200 feet of rope. Well, I do, but I'm not using it. And I wanted to use 2 separate ropes anyway to illustrate this point. If you don't have a rope 3 times or more, and more I should say, than the height you're climbing to, you're going to have to bend 2 ropes together. Now, I've used a Zeppelin bend here. There's not anything really special about the way I tie a Zeppelin, but that's a Zeppelin bend. You can see the tail length. This one's a little bit long. But of significance here, what we need to realize is this knot, if we join 2 ropes together rather than use one long continuous rope, and that may be more convenient for most of us. I think most people have 150-foot lengths of rope, so we could tie 250-foot lengths of rope together. These happen to be 120. So 200 feet of rope sometimes is not, as one continuous piece, is not always handy or available. So you can do this. When you tie the knot, it has to go above the descending device. If it's below it, it's going to act just like this safety knot does. Just as soon as you lower the climber enough for this knot to come up here and catch, you're done. And it takes some real jockeying around with mechanical advantage and some other things and some other type of releases to get out of a jammed problem like that. So it's very important this bend goes above the ascender or descender. You'll also notice I'm using a locking carabiner, and I have it so that the gate opens downward. That's another rule of safety, and that is the proper orientation for a carabiner. So, should I get up there and get in trouble, the solution would be pull this loop out, pull this knot loose, pull the handle over, and lower me to the ground. It just locked off. Let me come down to the ground. So that's the system I've been using, especially during these hot days when something could happen. So this is something I'm comfortable with and I like. I like the metal on poly rather than poly on poly. I think given enough time and you use the rope, you'll start to wear burn marks in here. Even though once you've got this tightened up, there's not a lot of motion. It doesn't take much under pressure to start to do burns on the rope, and this happens to be an aluminum delta. Steel or aluminum deltas are simply not going to do that. So that's the way I set it up, and it worked well. It's not guaranteed, but it works well for me.